Hey everyone, welcome to Food Talk with Dani Nierenberg. Today I get to chat with Sara Farley, the Vice President of the Global Food Portfolio at the Rockefeller Foundation. Sara leads initiatives including the Food Systems Vision Prize and drives the foundation's inaugural Regenerative Food Systems strategy. She's also a longtime friend of Food Tank and of me. Sara, thanks for joining me. This is great.
So good to be here, Dani. Every conversation with you leaves me feeling refreshed and inspired. So thanks for having me on.
That's how I feel about you. So I want to start by talking about the idea behind the foundation's Food Systems Vision Prize because it's really sort of this fun idea that turned into a movement, I feel like.
It was a fun idea, and it was a pretty bold idea, honestly. I think
Yeah.
a lot of us are familiar with prize philanthropy. That's really been used, especially for technological innovation, entities like NASA and DARPA, and so many more within the philanthropy community. But far more rare is the idea to use a vision as the thing you're trying to source, as opposed to a specific innovation. So
Hmm.
this was novel, and really Roy Steiner had an epiphany as he came into the leadership role of the food team of the Rockefeller Foundation that it's often hard for philanthropies to listen well. We
Right.
have our ideas, we have our strategies, and we need a mechanism to really hear what it is the future could be. What is it that people want? And I think that's
Right.
even more necessary because I don't know about you, Dani. I love sci-fi. I live in that world. When I turn my brain off, that's where I go. Whether it's Handmaid's Tale or Mad Max, you know, Dark Mirror, you pick your poison, but those are
Right.
such dark portrayals of the future, which means as a collective, even through artistic expression, we're putting forward very few
Yeah.
promising pictures of a world that isn't dystopian when we go out as far as like 2050, 2100. So
Right.
if we don't visualize it, if we don't dream it, it certainly is not going to happen accidentally.
Yeah.
So the idea here was like, let's put a little carrot out there, $2 million prize, not nothing, and let's see what it looks like when communities take the time to answer the question of, for you in your place, what is a nourishing, regenerative, and equitable food system?
Right.
And then it rained, and we really didn't think it was going to succeed because we put this prize out right before COVID. So like,
I remember
right,
very well.
flawless timing. You were one of our advisors, Danny, and we were like, oh my gosh, who is sitting around with time on their hands to dream and chart a path that is both scientifically feasible, politically salient, culturally appropriate, and can take us from where we are to where community X wants to be.
Yeah.
And yet it was over 1,370 teams from 119 countries, 4,000 organizations took the time and really like deliberately constructed these. I mean, these were tomes. They were so layered in terms of
Yeah.
what they were putting forward. And then to bring the judges, and we created an accelerator around storytelling and movement mobilization. And I think to your point, like, how did it go from a prize to a movement? I mean, it really isn't about Rockefeller at all. It is about the fact that real human beings, producers, consumers, activists, policymakers, business owners, entrepreneurs, farmers, they know what they want. They just
Sure.
often aren't given the like template, and in this
Yep.
case toolkit, to say, let's put it down and let's give you a little support to start to make those first strides to make it happen. So that's a bit
Yeah.
of the origin story.
No, and it turned out even, COVID, it was a terrible time, but it turned out to be kind of the perfect time because I feel going back to your point about listening, the what I miss about the pandemic, and there's not much to miss, is that the ability to listen to so many people. And what your point about listening well, foundations and organizations like Food Tank can listen, but listening well is a real talent.
Yeah, and it says it's becoming, I think, a lost art with our constant distraction and our just the millions of ways we can be drawn toward other stimuli. And so you're right, listening well. And it took partnership with groups like IDEO and Second Muse and the Guild of Future Architects. We had these like amazing co-implementers help us design this. But then we also had strategic advisors like Food Tank, but a whole plethora of really extraordinary organizations from Slow Food to so many others that brought their perspective. How do you
Right.
create that safe space? How do you create a space that is not just about like imagining utopia, but is really grounded in realities, is scientifically
Right.
plausible, and can bring forward a community that grows over time. Because really, at the end of the
Right.
day, this was not a prize for individuals. In fact, you got more points over the process of evolving your vision if you brought in more entities. So actually,
Right.
in our top 10, you'll see they straddle a bit of government, a bit of producer organizations, civil society, business. They're really nicely rounded and diverse in terms of like the faces in the organizations. And their stories since have only been stories of network growth. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, right, these visions are a network of network story. You've got to build that mycelial web through trust and hope and a shared sense of vision. And then you start to activate so many unexpected players. And that's really what we're seeing in many of these visions today, 5 years on, which is so heartwarming and so
Yeah.
affirming that this really was helpful in its way.
Sarah, can you tell me about, turning these from stories and visions into sort of a bigger storytelling component with the documentary?
Yeah, I think for so many of us, seeing is believing. And I'll say, these visions, when you just read them, and I read hundreds of them, they are incredibly dense, right? These are 70, 80, 90-page tomes full of uh, like a multi-dimensional portrayal of what the future will be, how we're going to get it. That's not for everybody's reading list on
Sure,
Friday
sure.
night. Whereas movies have the power to ignite and inspire and help us kind of relax into conversations that maybe feel too intense for a weeknight around the kitchen table.
Yeah.
And so it was a wonderful team called Media Red who said, I think you've got an opportunity here to celebrate and bring these stories to anyone with access to a television or a streaming service if we can go around the world and portray what they're doing and make it cinematic and make it delightful. And that's what they did. They went around the world. We actually thought it would just be the case that would have like a very short, like a documentary short, but there was so much footage and there were
Yeah.
so many stories in there that it ended up seeming like we had a feature length, so like a hour and a half film on our hands. And so it's really been guided first by the visionaries and guided by this desire to bring their stories forward, which then kind of opens up a space where all that Rockefeller is doing on our food team, in
Yeah.
fact, is inspired. The seeds were planted with these visionaries. And so there's a whole story of, I would say, manifestation that's happening on the other side
Yeah.
of the film. But the first step with the film is to get the film out. So we're going to be celebrating the film and having visionaries and conversation with you, of course, here in the coming days, which is going to be so, so exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk more about that later. I do want to say that one of the things I appreciate most about Food 2050 is it conveys that urgent need for food and agriculture systems transformation and, and the fixes that need to happen in so many
Yeah.
ways. But it balances that message with one of hope and love and, bringing people together. We need more of that, but it is very difficult to communicate. And it can be very difficult in this current sort of environment to communicate, bringing people together. And so, can you talk about how you and the filmmakers developed that narrative that is, balancing these different messages?
Yeah, there are a lot of tensions in the food system inherently. We want to get food that we can afford, which is really driving toward cheap. And we want food that is quality, that is grown in a way respectful of the producers, regenerative for the planet. That can feel like a real tension. There are other tensions in terms of we want food again that can be shelf stable and get to everywhere. That has, I think, spawned a lot of the globalization of the food system. But we want culturally appropriate foods that make
Yeah.
sense for people's identities and draw from their place and their customs. That again feels like a tension. So what does it all look like? I mean, we certainly, as the foundation or the advisors behind this prize, didn't want to superimpose that. We wanted to ask, like, what does it look like for you? And a first vision that comes to mind, Dani, with your question here would be a vision called 7 Gen, as in 7 generations. And this comes from the Sichangu uh, community, which is an indigenous community on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in the Dakotas. And, their whole premise of the 7 Gen vision is that decisions made for their food system are made to honor and empower children's 7 generations out. So you
Right.
imagine like every choice being made for that future grand times
Right.
seven child, right? And so, what does it look like? It looks like bringing back food culture to a reservation that has really been stripped of its food identity and its cultural identity, which happened with the suppression of
Yeah.
indigenous people across this country and in others. And so it's really a story of food sovereignty and of reclaiming food traditions. And at the very heart of that is the buffalo. And what was so extraordinary with the vision, they really wanted to bring buffalo back
Right.
to the Sichangu. And at the time of the filming of that vision, there were about 50 head of bison that were being released, and it was such a celebration. Today, 5 years out, they're at over 1,000, and
It's
other
amazing.
tribes from across the country are coming and learning. So it's a story of cultural sovereignty, of food sovereignty, of dignity, of reclamation of identity. All of that is woven together with food as medicine and with so many other dimensions of indigenous identity that are really, I think, at the heart of what it means for a full and total food system
Yeah.
to regenerate. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Dignity, identity, food as medicine, reclaiming, these traditions. One thing this film did not forget either, and I think this is very important because most of us who work in food and ag can forget this, that there's joy and there's deliciousness. And I
Yeah.
think this film portrays a lot of joy and deliciousness. And I'm sorry, I'm chasing the sunbeam from the winter sun. But that is a very important part of this that needs to be communicated more.
Yes, yes. And you feel it with the 7 Gen team, with the team in Dolly, China, where they're bringing this regeneratively grown food through restaurants that are entirely infused with this kind of ethic and vibrancy and the joy. You see it in the film of the women collecting these very traditional kinds of flower petals for a certain kind of ingredient, for a certain kind of special, culturally appropriate dish. I mean, it's something we all know. Like you don't have to work in the food system to know
Right.
that when you taste something delicious that maybe your mom or your grandma or your father or your cousin always makes, it brings a smile to your face and it creates an opening for human connection, whether that's to talk about a breakup or a wedding or what's on your mind that day. Food often creates permission, and you see that
Right.
in film over and over again, like food is connection.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, people who might be listening or viewing might think that, this prize and the documentary focused on high-tech solutions, but you talked about 7 Gen and there's so many sort of not exactly low tech, but not as technology focused solutions. And I wouldn't call them low tech because I do think there's a lot of innovation and technology, but something that's happening in Lima, where one of the top visionaries is using low tech solutions to save water and scale urban food production, is really exciting. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that project.
Yeah, I mean, it's one where if you've ever been to Lima, Peru, or are familiar with the country, you're at the high altitude in what today is one of the largest deserts of any urban environment in the world. And you think that that's the way it always was. But as the visionaries remind us, that was not the case. And
Right.
going far back in geologic and anthropological time, we can see through fossil evidence that it actually used to be a green Eden, and that it was an exploitation of the land that removed the trees and really sort of denuded the landscape, which is today such a desert. And it's a desert that exists with a fault line, which happens in so many of our cities. One side of the railroad, the poorest of the poor; on the other side, the opulent mansions with their swimming
Right.
pools. And so in Lima, this group of visionaries was looking at that extreme inequity through the lens of water security, food
Right.
security, dignity, really. And so, one of the really exciting innovations is effectively a fog catcher. So, Lima does get a lot of fog.
Yeah.
So, how might we pull that precipitation from the air itself,
Yeah.
collect it for drinking water? And so, they've made this just incredible progress toward bringing water security to a community that really is without in many instances. And that is coupled with urban gardening and rooftops and this really wild idea that even the archaeological riches of Peru, which can be vulnerable to neglect if there's not financing for them, you could reimagine those archaeological sites as sites for farmers markets and cultural connection, and bring the experience of food as community into a cultural site, which also makes it, frankly, more of a tourist attraction as
Right.
well. So it's like this really beautiful marriage of trying to tackle the inequity challenges, the food security challenges, but even the treasuring of cultural heritage, which I think is just such a beautiful angle on that vision. And that one's
Right.
the Lima 2035 vision. Yeah.
Yeah. That idea of honoring the past and you know using this idea of going forward by going back, you kind of see that throughout the film, remembering those traditions, but bringing them forward in a new and different way for where we are right now in the world.
That's totally it. You know, another of the visions that I think does that so beautifully in the film, but as we've got to know them over the years, is called Arakunomics. Araku is a region in India, and they've really focused on the regenerative transition. How do we depart from the synthetic input, fossil fuel derived chemical input agriculture to a form of agriculture we're using biological input? So think compost and biological amendments so that you can still have high productivity, but you do so without that fossil fuel reliance,
Yeah.
without the toxic health effects for farm workers, and with so many other benefits for biodiversity and soil health, etc. There's lots of names for what that is. They use the name regenerative. So it's this like really beautiful regenerative story, but it's also fueled by indigenous women who live in that part of India. And there's a piece of it, which is an income generation approach, which is around specialty coffee. And I have to say, having tried the Araku coffee, it is magnificent coffee. And since the film, actually, the Araku brand is gone completely global. They'll be opening a shop in New York City shortly, actually. So it's
So
just,
cool.
yeah, it's just amazing that they've managed to mainstream this idea that regenerative production can deliver a higher quality product and
Yeah.
at the same time benefit what have been some of the most marginalized and overlooked producers.
Right. So important. Sarah, this might seem like a simple question, but what was the most surprising thing to you about the film? And you knew you talked about reading these visionary stories, but seeing them sort of come to life. What surprised you the most?
I I loved seeing children be involved in these visions. Like that to me is the proof that like it wasn't just whoever actually had to hold the pen and sit there and type out these
Yeah.
giant descriptions that no doubt emerged from countless meetings of so many participants behind each vision. Once you see children involved, then it's like, okay, this is actually gaining hold. This
Yeah.
is important enough. A parent is going to spend time with their kid on the execution of this challenge. Like that removes some of the cynicism that like it's good for now, but if those, acolytes of this idea turn to other passions and pursuits, is going to die on the vine. Children are the next generation.
Yeah.
So, and you see that in the film. So I think it didn't come out in the written word, but you see it in the film, and it just, oh my gosh, like that's the proof we need. That's the proof it's a movement that's coming about.
Right. And that there is that hope there, that it is not that dystopian world that we are all so sort of afraid of in so many ways, because it's good to read about, when you're in bed at night and with a glass of wine, but it's not that fun when you're thinking about the real world and looking outside.
Totally, totally. I think for me it was a true privilege and a luxury that in COVID, a time of such fear and isolation. I mean, so few of us had been through something like a pandemic before in its, global encompassing reach and sense of dread and doom and unknown.
Yeah.
And I got to be in this like bubble during it in the sense that I was like with my mind going into all these visions and
Yeah.
engaging with them virtually. I wasn't getting to see them for a couple of years before I
Right.
actually got to meet any of these humans in the flesh. But that really buoyed me. And it reminded me that like even as somebody who does love sci-fi, but someone who's plugged into the news and is doing this work of trying to serve humanity and improve the well-being of humanity, which is the Rockefeller Foundation's mission, it's heavy work. And I know
Yeah.
you live in that work, Dani, and you are connected to so many in the food system who are struggling right now.
Yeah.
And you cannot look away. You will not look away. But somewhere we have to give ourselves the oxygen to like keep
Yeah.
going. And hope is what gives you that. And when it's real people in the real food system giving you that hope, like what a beautiful salve for what feels so paralyzing on so many other fronts.
Yeah, and that's why the storytelling that the Rockefeller Foundation, that Media Red does and did with this film is so, so important.
Thanks, Danny. I think Roy had it right that we are we are struggling to find hope, and without hope, the people perish. And so I hope for everyone that comes in contact with the visionaries, either by reading about them or by seeing the film, or if you're lucky enough to engage with them directly, there's that exhale that comes from like,
Right.
okay, it's gonna be okay. There's people
Right.
like this. And I will say those visionaries, when they came through the Vision Prize, it wasn't because they were so well heeled and well funded and it was all thought
Right.
out. Like some of these were like on the piece of a shoestring, they had pulled
Right.
this together, the nub of the shoestring. And what's cool, actually, I just read an email yesterday, actually, from a team that didn't make the top 10. They're not in the film. They were a team in Oregon, and they bring together fishers and producers and community government and business. They weren't knocked down by not winning the prize, but
Sure.
the power of articulating the vision has so fueled them. They did an accounting of all the grants they got from the federal
Yeah.
government, all the ways that this has actually fueled real reform in Oregon for these
Yeah.
producers. It was just so awesome. I know another story actually down the road in New Jersey. Similarly, they didn't make it to the top 10, but it's a group around something called Ethos Farm
Yeah.
that brings regenerative production and food as medicine together with an actual physician and a bunch of medical interns, residents who are learning the power of utilizing beautiful regenerative grown food to treat chronic conditions, metabolic conditions, especially
Right.
diabetes, heart disease, etc., and created this massive movement around it in Jersey. And they also point to the Vision Prize as a way that they consolidated, sharpened their vision, and brought together a movement that is just growing so beautifully. So there are people like you, Dani, that bring hope to others. And I think this process puts so many more of them on my radar. And I hope it does the
Yeah.
same for everyone who encounters it.
Yeah, and having a little, food tank had such a small part in helping, be evaluators as part of this. Reading those visions and seeing how people sort of strung everything together was really cool and inspiring. And at a time during the pandemic when I needed more hope than usual, it was
Yep.
really cool to see how, like, oh, this is how it works. This is how you create, this type of food system that can transform people's lives. And I found the process of it so interesting and so sort of nourishing in many ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And what was so cool too, because we got this bounty, and again, because of COVID, we thought we're going to get 100 submissions if we're lucky. So it was
Sure.
so many more than we got. We actually worked with a big data team and we put all the submissions into, a pot and they stirred it to try to
Yeah.
distill like what's in there. Like, are there trend lines? Like, what do you see when you zoom out and look at 1,370 of these visions? What does it tell you about the world? Because they are quite site specific. Stone
Yeah.
Barns here in the Hudson Valley, very different vision than Dali, China, so different from Lima, Peru. Is there any trend line that you can distill? And there are these significant universal themes. And one of the universal themes is like food as resilience, that if we alter our production systems to incentivize producing in a way that builds back soil health, biodiversity, water quality, and the well being of producers, we can, in fact, ensure greater resilience to
Yeah.
climate shocks and, frankly, to the crippling economic insecurity that is increasingly a reality for
Yeah.
producers.
Yeah.
We also saw a theme, a ubiquitous theme of food as medicine, that in the future, really the way we grow our food can be a source of increased health. It's this question of, let's take diabetes. Do you want to treat diabetes with a lifetime of medication, or by altering the diet, more fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, can you decrease your A1Cs
Yeah.
and do so at a much lower price point, and
Right.
frankly have all these other health benefits? So that's the food as medicine piece. There was a food as sovereignty, and really this kind of storyline that when we get it right, in the voice of these thousands of visionaries, when we get it right, it's about reconnecting this, necessary bond between humanity, each other, and place and culture.
Yeah.
And that, food is not the only thing that can do that, right? And
Sure.
it can't do it alone, but it can be this powerful force. And then food is love, which kind of was at the top of your interview, Dani, that food itself and the way we steward the food system and the way we embrace each other within the food system can be an act of love. It doesn't have to be an act of exploitation,
Right.
of inequity, which it so often is. It can be
Right.
quite the opposite. And we know that when we sit at a table for a collective community dinner, whether that is a Thanksgiving or a birthday or another special holiday. We know what it can be. Can it be that for more people? It can be that more often.
That's so great. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the prize has shaped what Rockefeller continues to work on. How has, how have all of these visionaries sort of changed what you prioritize?
Yeah, it's so awesome to actually look back over the 7 years since I've been at the foundation and the food team, because it really is the case that 7 years ago, we put forward a food system strategy to our board. And in it, like a center piece of it, was this food system vision prize. And we said, we're going to listen and learn to then refine the contours of the strategy. And, I just spoke to what these drawing out these key themes showed us. Food is resilience, food is medicine. What do we have now? $220 million we have now committed going forward for the next 5 years on one, food is medicine,
Yeah.
$100 million. Two, a beautiful kind of big bet that takes the regenerative transition and the power of procurement and a focus on children, the next generation, and bonds it together in something we
Yeah.
call regenerative school meals. We've just committed $100 million to that. And because understanding the relationship of cultural sovereignty to very specific types of food that grow in specific places and what that means for our physiological needs requires deep science. We
Yeah.
have our periodic table of food initiative with $20 million initiative. So that's $220 million. And I would give credit to every one of those 4,000 organizations for teaching us that that is the direction of travel that we are now committed to taking.
That's so beautifully put and such a great way to sum up what you're doing. So we're going to be in LA next week for the premiere of Food 2050. What do you hope the audience takes away from it?
Hope, hope with a side order of hope. Let's leave feeling jazzed. When was the last time you watched anything or heard anything on the news where you're like, yes, right? Can't remember, can we?
Nope.
So let's dance out of there, and I hope that the people in a position to kind of think about where this film will go next will realize how powerful it will be to put it on platforms that can be shared with
Yeah.
children in classrooms, with influencers of all types. That's what I really hope people take from the film.
Absolutely. And we have more information on the Food Tank website about the premiere. Where can people find more information about you, Sarah, and the film?
They can find more information on the Rockefeller Foundation website. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so yeah, you'll be able to find me easily.
And the URL for the film is food2050film.com.
Thank you so much, Dani, for this conversation. It just talking about this and these visionaries, just even the mention of them gets me excited and energized for the rest of my day.
I
And
know you're
for
so
all you do.
happy.
I am. I
Thank
am.
you so much. I will see you next week.
Sounds great. Can't wait. Bye.
Bye.